All right, guys. So welcome to the first Julien's Corners podcast. Am I watching that one?
Sure.
Yeah, there you go.
Play the room.
Yeah, look, hey, I can't do the rock thing, but hey. So, by the way, why the Julien's Corners podcast? Like I explained all that on a video before, but let me state a little bit what I want out of this podcast. I think they are foundational principles to strong fit when it touches to movement, but there's really one true foundational principle, which is information management. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. That's the point of the podcast today. But this requires far more technical endeavors on my part, stuff that are very, very advanced. They can go extremely deep into very specific things. And I don't think that the Strong Fit podcast commercially is the right place for it. Tyler is there, so he knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like even him, sometimes he has to work on shit going like, where do we go with that? I'm like, I don't know, man, we improvise. But we can't always cover it in as deep as I would like. Let me put it this way. So we decided to create another podcast, Julien's Corner podcast. And again, Tyler will be there. So it's still a little bit of a conversation, but at least I can go very deep into very deep subjects. And what I can do out of that is list under the studies, the papers that I'm talking about, the videos that you might need to see. So that means we can go in depth into each subject. And under it, you'll have the comment section where we can go even more into some explanation if you need. This is also why it's going to be behind a paywall, so that this is going to be a lot of work between the papers, the studying, and all of this. And so it's going to cost money. Like, for example, just for today, it took me like over an hour and a half of work just to get everything situated. It's going to be a different kind of podcast, but I think one that is sorely needed, honestly. And so today I want to talk about that, about information management. Why does it matter so much? I think we cannot understand people truly if we do not understand, to quote Schrödinger, what is life. What do I mean by that? Biochemistry, and actually the whole, like chemistry and then the medical world and everything has a very, very strong reductionist view on life, on the universe in general. This is actually following a reductionist view of science, of physics, right? In the 17th, 18th century, since Newton. Newton introduced through his beautiful laws a very reductionist view of the universe, which at the time was a major improvement and very, very necessary. The issue was it was not correct. It's correct to a certain point, but then when Einstein and quantum mechanics arrived, we realized that we had pigeonholed ourselves into a view of the universe that is not correct. It is not deterministic. And that is something that the medical world, including chemistry and biochemistry, still struggles with. And so there are times where you want to be revolutionary and times where you want to be more conservative when it comes to science, right? I believe that for biochemistry, right now is a need to be revolutionary. So how do you do that? They call that radical conservationism, in the sense of we're going to push the theory to the point where we hit a paradox. We need to push as far as we can every single theory. And when you hit the paradox, finally you go like, or a problem, you go like, all right, this is work needs to be done. Fundamentally, biochemistry is not doing it. We are still stuck with that 18th century view of the world when it comes to biosymmetry, maybe 19th century, early 19th century, basically pre-quantum mechanics. Because most biologists follow the rules of physics pre-quantum mechanics, so in a very deterministic way, and basically say, all right, so if we apply that to chemistry, work is done. Maybe we don't understand all of it, but basically done with this. I think fundamentally, we see that in the medical profession a lot. I think fundamentally also, we understand this better if we understand the history of chemistry, biochemistry, and the history of the medical world. If you look at doctors were always called when you were dying. Right? That was their job really, is when you were either maimed at war or super sick or things like that. So that's how the industry of doctors got created. And they're fundamentally the same. If you look now in today's world, everything is a pathology. And what do they say, for example, about antidepressants? Antidepressants, like, why it's better to take antidepressants if it stops people from jumping. I'm like, obviously that's true, right? If the antidepressant stops you from killing yourself, from committing suicide, it's obviously a good thing. But the problem is so maybe that's why you take it the first time, but after a month, that's not why you're still on them. Now you're still on them because it allows you to stay in the middle, allows you to go back to work the next day. So the original intent of the pills has been completely, how do I say that nicely, changed into something that is vastly influenced by money. How about that?
I was going to say bastardized.
Yeah, but I like bastardized actually. So yeah, that idea has been bastardized into, look, let me put you back to work tomorrow morning, take those pills. And that's really the world we live in now. And so you have to understand, we are stuck on a number of issues, not because of science, really. We're stuck on a number of issues because of the humanness of science. There is no such thing as science. There's only a bunch of scientists trying to move things forward. What chemistry, biology, all that stuff has not done yet is incorporate the advance in physics toward quantum dynamics and things like this. And so the problem that we see right now in biochemistry, for example, I'm going to give you an example on that, is that in order to justify that deterministic view of the universe and how they do things, they need functional segregation. They're going to take something to its most basic form, study it, and say, ha, that's how it works. Except that when you go through functional integration, you realize that that particular thing that is studied in a lab in a very specific situation does not apply to real life anymore. What do I mean by that? As, for example, as an example, lactic acid, and then I did a whole thing on that. The human body does not produce lactic acid. It only produces lactate. You can create lactic acid in a lab in very specific fermentation, very specific things, usually non-life, right? The second you put it into a human body, you cannot produce lactic acid anymore. The pH is like 3.6, 3.8. It cannot be produced into a human body at the temperature of 37.2 degrees, because temperature matures a lot with all those things, and a pH that is between 6 and 7.5. It does not, thermodynamically, it does not work like that. So you don't produce lactic acid. Another example is lactic acidosis causing muscle fatigue. This has been studied in a lab showing that certain pumps, like the calcium pump and everything, don't work as well, blah, 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 blah. So they call lactic acidosis equals muscle fatigue. First of all, since you don't produce lactic acid, you can't have lactic acidosis. That hydrogen ion has nothing to do with the acidosis in question. On top of it, once you take the acidosis and all that stuff toward what they call lactic acid in a body at the temperature of 32.2, which is a regular temperature of a human body, those things cease to exist, which means the problem that you see in a lab on lactic acidosis at a normal temperature of a body don't happen anymore. This is why I talked about, for example, one of the biggest factors for recovery is temperature. Because now we're going into something even deeper that I'll make a podcast about. But just to give you an example, that things through functional segregation can be explained a certain way. The problem is when you go toward functional integration, you start to hit a wall. What you see in a lot of biochemistry now is they just don't go to functional integration because otherwise they hit a wall and then they have to go whoops. And so instead of that, we just stop at functional segregation and no one is taking a chance anymore because money, because the world, the way we've built it right now. So there are fundamental things at play here that I believe are necessary to understand, and they go more toward physics than pure biochemistry, although it can be applied, that are necessary for us to understand if we want to understand human behavior. I think we have to understand fundamentally at a cellular level what life is, or almost on a physics level, if we want to push it all the way to the nervous system. Because at the end, all of this comes down to information management. So what do I mean by that? So information management, this is something that has been, at the time, seen as one of the biggest discovery ever. I don't think many people know this, even though we did a podcast with Tyler about that, about Schrödinger, 1944 book, What is Life? And he did a number of studies after this. And the idea that he brings forward into his book and set of lectures is nothing short of revolutionary. It's it fundamentally starts to get physics and biology together, which is a big no-no. And in there, by the way, out of this book came the idea of DNA, and came also out of it to me, which was an even more fundamental idea, is that there is a difference between life and non-life. Now, that seems obvious when I say it like that, but what is the difference? If you narrow it down, at the end, what is it? And the biggest difference there was that life tries to fight entropy. Now, you need to understand why this is important. There are certain laws of physics that can be bent, and others that can be broken, depending if you're talking about the micro world and everything. There is one law that is called the -1 law. It's because, Newton called it the second law of thermodynamics, but many physicists now call it the -1 law, in the sense of that is the one rule that cannot be bent, that cannot be broken. If you think you're bending it, you're wrong. If you think you're breaking it, you're certainly wrong into that one. That's really the fundamental one. The idea that entropy always increases. And that idea is actually fundamental to understanding of the universe. Everything gets bounced off of the second law of thermodynamics. And so the idea that Schrödinger had, it was that life tries to beat the second law of thermodynamics, tries to go against it. And that is such a powerful idea, because even if you listen to this, that means that there is intent now. That the difference between life and non-life is that non-life entropy always increases, which means everything goes toward disorder. A chair, for example, will decompose into small particles that will be blown up everywhere till the chair basically completely disappears, right? That's entropy. It's just a measure of disorder of a system keeps on increasing. So we go toward, the universe goes toward thermal equilibrium, so death eventually. That's that idea, right? So everything dies. And that life tries to fight that, tries to fight the increase of entropy. Cannot win, because entropy always has to increase, but try to not let it increase too much. So there's the continuous fight between the two. And we're going to see in the next few podcasts how much of a concept that matters, because we're going to see like that information management is a lot about resetting a state, like getting a lesson, but forgetting the experience, even at a cellular level. So information management in that sense is key to everything. And that's an idea that just kept on developing all the way to Carl Friston when he came with the free energy principle in 2007, where he introduced the idea of the Bayesian brain, being a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, the idea that fundamental idea from Schrödinger that life tries to fight entropy works all the way to the cellular level, and in a Bayesian inference way that explains how even the brain works. And so there's a fundamental idea there, information management, that is so important. And out of that, we're going to see also information management means Maxwell's demon. Maxwell's demon out of James Maxwell, who came up with the electromagnetism equation. So he was a guy who basically got magnetism and light together, 1967, I think. So quite an important man, and then he had that idea about the Maxwell's demon that I'll go into another podcast. But we're going to see that idea of information management is going to take us from the principle of what is life all the way to the nervous system. And if we don't understand that notion well, I think we cannot understand how the humans are doing their daily thing. And so that's why you hear me talk about the nervous system all the time, is because the nervous system implies, as I'll explain, intent, and incorporate the idea of information management. For example, you're going to hear me talk about HRV, but HRV is a measure of the connection between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. When they fit together well, you get a high HRV. When they don't, you get a low HRV. Right, which is also a sign of health and cognition and many different things. So the information management between the peripheral and the central nervous system is actually of a huge importance. So we're going to go deeper and deeper into that rabbit hole, which I believe is the foundation of everything. And through that lens, that specific color, I will take us, the human body, mind, and everything, through that journey. And but that is such an important and powerful idea. I'm going to need steps almost on everything. I'm going to need one to explain what the Maxwell demons are, how it applies on a cellular level, what did Schrödinger mean exactly? How far is Carl Friston is taking that idea? How and why does it affect the nervous system? Fight versus flight, for example. What is the difference? Intent is one. Fight means you want to be there. Flight, you don't want to be there. So that want versus don't want, right? That's intent. There's a tremendous power there. But and if you look in the world, medical world today, fight and flight are considered the same because it's a sympathetic reaction. Who cares the difference that it makes? And we're going to see that it makes all the difference in the world, all the way to the hormonal responses and chemistry and things like that. So just to finish the podcast on information management, to me, it's not life acts like Alpha Zero. It's like we are creating a new type of, it's not artificial intelligence yet, but we're trying to go there. And I made a podcast one time about Stockfish versus Alpha Zero. And Stockfish being, at the time, the world champion of chess computers, right? And he had a match of 100 games against Alpha Zero, which was a new form of machine learning called based on Q-learning and things like this. I'll put the link to the podcast that I did on the subject. But one of the characteristics of Alpha Zero, which was very important, is that it was not based on brute computation. It was not based on memorization like Stockfish was. Stockfish had like 100,000 games in it, all the table for openings, table for the end games and all that stuff. Well, Alpha Zero had none of that. Alpha Zero just played itself. But the difference is whether, since he played itself, he lost every game, obviously, or even a draw, but he learned from that. But what happened was every game he learned from was erased. So it erased the experience, but kept the lesson and produced a better coding every single time until at the end, Alpha Zero could be put on a simple laptop. Now, to get to that, you needed all the computers at Google. So the computational power to create Alpha Zero was through the roof. But Alpha Zero itself could be put on a simple laptop to play. And you're going to see that at a cell level, it actually works exactly the same way. Everything is information. You see that from DNA, RNA, and everything. But creating information actually requires no energy. Erasing information, resetting information is where the energy is being spent. So we're going to see that on a cellular level, it actually works the same way, where you erase the experience but keep the lesson, which means, and that's where the Maxwell demons come in that I'll explain, which means that the cell has to choose certain path. If you see evolution creates new information all the time. At a cell level, it has to choose which information is relevant and which one is not, depending on, on every second in a environment that has a lot of background noise, because the cell is small, it's very hot, 37 degrees actually very hot. There's a lot of entropy being created. There has to be a need to choose the relevant information, right? And so once the relevant information is has been chosen, then it has to be, and then you get to a better coding, then this has to be erased, so that otherwise creating too much information would create too much entropy, which would lead to the death of the cell. So there's a process of erasing stuff as we go forward, right? And that's where we need the ATP actually and all that stuff. Exactly like Alpha Zero does, or it's more like Alpha Zero does exactly what life does on the chemical level. But that's all the science of information management. And that works on all levels, from the cellular level all the way to the nervous system, the way we function as humans, with the hierarchical system that we have in place that I'll talk about and all that things, right? So I believe, like, in a way, the fundamental principle of Strong Fit is information management. And so I'm very excited to be able to go in this format, because I can go really, really deep into what is, I believe, the most important subject today, whether it's physics, chemistry, medical, whatever, nervous system, movement, or stuff like that. And this is why, if you listen to us all the time, we talk about intent, we talk about understanding what movement you're doing, and all that stuff. Everything is information management. And so that's that's the rabbit hole I'm going to get into those podcasts. And then I'll do some funny ones on the side as well. But this, I want to truly cover the one at a time in great precision.